I feel like I've been running my whole life. It's not the kind of run that gets you anywhere. It's more like a hamster wheel, just spinning and spinning with no real purpose. And every time I think I can step off, I get pulled back in. I didn't realize it until a few months ago when I moved back in with my grandparents. It was supposed to be temporary, just a break from everything. But somehow, it turned into the only place I felt safe in a long time. Things weren't good at home, or in my marriage for that matter. Alex and I had been drifting for a while. It felt like we were just two people living in the same house, sharing nothing but the occasional glance or comment. The spark we used to have was gone. In fact, I'm not even sure if I ever knew who he really was anymore. I'd been married to him for 3 years, but our entire relationship was built on illusions. At first, I thought he was everything I needed. He had that easy charm, that confident smile that made everyone think he had it together. But when we started living together, I realized that charm didn't extend beyond the surface. He was unpredictable, selfish, and emotionally distant. Every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, it was like talking to a wall. He'd nod, say, "I get it," and then go back to whatever he was doing. I tried to make it work. I convinced myself that I was overreacting. It's normal to go through rough patches, right? I made excuses for him. Maybe he was stressed at work. Maybe he just needed time to open up. Maybe he just wasn't used to talking about feelings. But no matter what, he never really listened. It was always about him, about his needs, his problems, and I was left with nothing. When I finally left, it wasn't a big dramatic moment. I didn't throw my clothes into a suitcase and storm out. It was more like I just stopped caring. The house felt empty, and the only thing I wanted was peace. So I packed a bag and left for my grandparents' house. They lived about an hour outside the city, tucked away in a small town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was calm. No loud noises, no constant demands on my time. Just me, my thoughts, and a whole lot of quiet. The first few days felt strange. I wasn't used to not being constantly busy. I'd come from a life where every second was filled with something, whether it was work, house chores, or pretending everything was fine with Alex. But here, in my grandparents' old house, it was different. The air was thick with the smell of aging wood and lavender, and the silence felt like a weight, but not in a bad way. More like the kind of weight that makes you realize how long you've been carrying things that aren't yours to carry. My grandmother, Clara, always had this way about her. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was like she'd hit a nerve with every word. My granddad, George, was quieter. He'd sit in his armchair, reading his paper, but when he spoke, you listened. They had this subtle power over me, not through control, but through the simple way they lived their lives. They were content in their own way, and I envied that. At first, I didn't know how to be around them. It felt awkward, like I didn't belong, but they were patient with me. They didn't ask too many questions about why I left, or about Alex, and that was exactly what I needed. There was a certain comfort in their quiet acceptance. Over time, though, I began to notice things that I hadn't before. Clara had this delicate routine every day. Morning tea, a little gardening, an afternoon nap, dinner at 5 p.m. sharp. It seemed like such a small thing, but in that predictability, I saw something I hadn't in a long time. Stability. It was so foreign to me, yet so reassuring. One evening, after dinner, I sat with my grandfather on the porch while Clara cleaned up inside. The sun was just setting, and the warm glow cast long shadows over the fields. It was one of those perfect, quiet moments. I didn't say anything at first, just stared out at the horizon, letting the calmness settle into me. You ever wonder what it would have been like if you just stopped running earlier? George asked, his voice low but firm. I hadn't expected it, and I'm pretty sure my expression showed it. But his gaze was steady, like he already knew the answer. I don't know, I replied, turning towards him. I think I've been so busy trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, I forgot to even ask if I'm happy with where I am. Most people do, he said, leaning back in his chair. They get stuck in what's comfortable, even if it's not what they need. The trick is knowing when to stop. It was simple advice, but it hit me hard. I'd spent so long trying to convince myself that the life I was living was enough. But was it? And now that I had this space to think, could I really go back to the chaos of what I was running from? I didn't have an answer yet. I don't think I was even close to figuring it out. But something shifted that night. It wasn't a big revelation, just a quiet understanding that there was more to life than the noise I'd been surrounded by. Maybe I had been running for so long because I didn't know what it meant to just be. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to figure out what I wanted next. I didn't expect to sleep well that night, but for some reason, the quiet of the house and the steady rhythm of my grandparents' lives made everything feel still. The anxiety that had been clinging to me for months, maybe years, seemed to fall away, and I woke up the next morning with a sense of calm that felt like it belonged to someone else. Clara was already up when I came downstairs, her soft humming filling the air as she worked on her crossword puzzle. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and baked bread, and for a brief moment, I felt like I was back in my childhood. It wasn't the same house, but the feeling of being taken care of being allowed to exist without expectations, was the same. "Morning, dear," Clara said without looking up. She was always like that, so present, yet never intrusive. It was as if she knew exactly what you needed, even if you didn't. "Morning," I replied, still not quite sure what to say. I'd been here for a few days now, and it still felt like I was living in someone else's life. But something about today felt different. "You'll find your way," she said, finally glancing up from her puzzle with a knowing look. "In your own time. But you have to let go of what's been holding you." I hadn't realized I was even thinking about it until she said it, but I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't just about Alex. It was the way I'd been clinging to my old life, even when I knew it wasn't working. The way I kept trying to piece together a future that didn't fit anymore. Clara didn't have to explain it further. I didn't even need to ask how she knew what I was feeling. Somehow, it was enough just to hear it aloud. Later that day, I took a walk around the property. The sun was high in the sky, and the air was warm but not oppressive. It was that perfect late summer heat that clung to your skin without being unbearable. The fields around the house stretched out, dotted with small patches of wildflowers and the occasional tree. It was beautiful here, so different from the suffocating, busy city life I'd left behind. I spent hours walking, not really thinking about anything in particular. It wasn't that I was trying to clear my head. It was more that I was allowing myself the space to think, to feel, without judgment. The sound of my footsteps on the dirt path, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant hum of insects. It was all part of a rhythm that was so different from the one I'd been living. I didn't realize how much I needed that until I felt it in my bones. By the time I returned to the house, the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting everything in a warm golden glow. Clara was sitting on the porch, knitting as usual, while George had already settled into his chair with a book. They didn't say much, but I could feel their presence, calm, steady, unhurried. I sat down next to Clara, looking out at the view, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. That night, over dinner, I found myself opening up to them in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't anything monumental, just small pieces of my life, stories of my childhood, of my time with Alex, of things I never realized I'd been holding on to. Clara and George didn't interrupt or offer solutions. They just listened, which was exactly what I needed. I hadn't realized how much I'd been talking to walls in my life until now. Sometimes, you have to let yourself be lost before you can find your way again, George said after a long silence. It's not about fixing everything, but about learning to accept it. It sounded so simple, but in that moment, I understood. I wasn't broken. I didn't need to be fixed. I just needed time to process, to heal, to be. That night, as I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside of me. Maybe it was the quietness of the house, or the patience of Clara and George, but I realized I had been giving myself deadlines. Expectations that I had to figure everything out now, that I had to move on in some way. But that wasn't the point. The point was to stop forcing myself into some idea of what I thought I should be and just be. The next morning, I decided to go back to the city, but not in the way I had imagined. I wasn't going back to salvage my marriage or to make things right with Alex. I wasn't going back with the intention of fixing anything. I was going back because I needed to see it through a new lens, one that wasn't shaped by the anger and confusion I'd been carrying. It felt strange to leave the quiet comfort of my grandparents' house. I didn't know exactly what would happen once I got back to the city, but I knew I had to return on my own terms, not out of fear or guilt. Clara hugged me before I left, a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "You'll be okay," she said, as if she already knew what I couldn't admit to myself yet. "Thanks," I said quietly, my throat tight. I didn't have the words to express what I felt. It wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper. She had given me something I didn't realize I was missing. Permission? Permission to stop, to breathe, to exist without the pressure of constantly chasing something. As I drove back, the city seemed a little less suffocating. The rush of the traffic, the noise, the people. It wasn't as overwhelming as it had been before. Maybe it was because I was no longer running from it. Maybe it was because I was learning how to stand still. I didn't know what the future held, and for the first time, that was okay. The city was as I had left it. No surprises there. The same honking horns, the same people rushing to places they didn't want to be. But something was different in the air. I wasn't the same person who had fled the chaos a few days ago. The noise still grated on my nerves, but it didn't feel like it was closing in on me. I felt like I had a little more space now, a little more room to breathe. I walked into the apartment to find it untouched, as if it had been waiting for me. The coffee table was exactly how I'd left it, cluttered with old magazines and unopened mail. The dishes sat in the sink, a reminder of how much I had ignored in my life before I left. The walls, though, those same walls that once felt so suffocating, now seemed like they were merely containing the echoes of a past life. Alex wasn't home yet. I could tell by the silence, the way everything still felt so untouched. I dropped my bag on the couch and ran my fingers over the back of it. Everything was in its place. I hadn't expected the apartment to change, but in a way, it felt like it had. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee, the sound of the kettle humming a bit too loud in the otherwise quiet space. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any idea what was supposed to come next. When Alex came in later, the tension was already there. The kind of tension that comes with knowing you've both been living parallel lives in the same house, but no longer sharing the same space. She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, looking exhausted but not surprised to see me sitting in the kitchen. "Didn't expect you back so soon," she said, a hint of coldness in her voice. "I didn't expect to be," I replied, unsure of what else to say. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. There were so many things I wanted to say, about the mess we had created, about how I had run away, about everything that had gone wrong. But I didn't know where to begin, and maybe I didn't need to. "I needed some time," I finally said, my voice softer than I intended. "Some space." Alex nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I get it," she said, though I wasn't sure she did. I wasn't sure I even fully understood myself. I had always been the one to hold everything together. In the relationship, in life, I was the one who kept things from falling apart. But somehow, in trying to hold everything together, I had lost sight of who I was. I had become so consumed with fixing things, with making everything perfect, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. "I don't know what happens next," I said, breaking the silence. Alex's expression flickered, as if she wasn't sure how to respond. She had always been good at reading me, but maybe, like me, she was too tired to figure it all out. "I don't either," she finally admitted, her voice small. "But maybe we can figure it out." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an offer of reconciliation. It was just a statement, a quiet acceptance of the fact that we were both lost in this. We were two people who had been walking parallel paths for too long, but had never actually walked the same road. "I need time," I said, my voice steady now. I wasn't asking for permission. I was telling her what I needed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt sure of it. Alex didn't say anything for a moment, but she didn't argue either. She just nodded, slowly, as if she understood. Maybe, deep down, she had known this was coming. Maybe we had both known, but had been too afraid to face it. That night, we ate dinner in silence, the kind of silence that comes with uncertainty. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. It was the kind of silence that hangs in the air when two people have reached a point where they don't know how to move forward, but they're too tired to pretend everything is fine. I went to bed early that night, though sleep didn't come easy. My mind was racing, trying to process everything. The walk through my grandparents' land had given me clarity, but it didn't provide answers. I was still living in the same city, in the same apartment, with the same life. Nothing had really changed, but everything had changed. I didn't know if Alex and I would make it. I didn't know if we could fix what was broken, or if we even should. But I did know this. I couldn't keep pretending that I had everything figured out. I couldn't keep running away from the things that scared me. And I couldn't keep pretending that I wasn't lost. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Alex. Just a few lines, written in her careful handwriting. I don't have all the answers either, but I'm here. We're both here. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now. I stared at the note for a long time. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a declaration of anything. But in its simplicity, it was honest. It was real. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were both acknowledging that we didn't have to have everything figured out. Not yet. I took a deep breath, folding the note carefully and slipping it into my pocket. There was a long road ahead. But for the first time in ages, I felt like I wasn't walking it alone. The days blurred together, each one folding into the next. I wasn't sure if things were better, but I knew they weren't worse. That felt like progress, at least. I stopped overthinking every small interaction with Alex and started letting things unfold without the constant fear of, what if, hanging over me. The space I had taken for myself had created something I didn't expect, a sense of calm, a sort of quiet peace. But it wasn't perfect. Of course, nothing was. There were still moments when the silence between Alex and me felt too thick, like a weight pressing down on our chests. Small gestures that used to come naturally now seemed forced, like we were learning how to be around each other again. We didn't argue, but we didn't talk much, either. Instead, we existed in the same space, sometimes barely acknowledging each other, but still there. And maybe that was okay. One evening, after work, I decided to take a walk, just to clear my head. The weather had finally started to shift, the summer heat giving way to crisp, early fall air. It was the kind of evening that felt like a promise, the kind of night that invited you to take a deep breath and let go of all the tension. I walked through the park near our apartment, the paths familiar but somehow different. It felt like everything was on the edge of change, like the world was quietly holding its breath. I didn't know where I was going, but that seemed fitting. I was learning, little by little, how to let myself go where I needed to be, rather than trying to control every step. As I reached the park bench where I used to sit and read, I noticed someone sitting there. A woman, maybe a little older than me, with short brown hair and a calm, thoughtful expression. She was staring out at the trees, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I didn't recognize her, but there was something familiar about the way she sat, the way she looked like she was waiting for something to come to her. I paused, considering walking on, but for some reason, I felt drawn to her. It wasn't that I expected anything, but something inside me told me that I needed to sit, to connect with the world around me in a way that I hadn't in a long time. Mind if I join you? I asked, my voice a little more tentative than I intended. She looked up at me, her expression soft, and smiled. Not at all, she said, patting the space beside her. I sat down carefully, feeling a little out of place at first. We sat in silence for a while, both of us looking at the trees, watching the leaves begin to turn, the soft whisper of the wind stirring them. It was the kind of quiet that felt comfortable. Not forced, not uncomfortable, just two people existing in the same moment. After a few minutes, she spoke again. You look like you have something on your mind, she said, her voice gentle but perceptive. You don't have to tell me what it is, but sometimes it helps to talk. I almost laughed at how easily she could read me. I hadn't said a word, and yet she already knew. Maybe that was the way people are when they've learned to listen. Not just to words, but to everything beneath them. I don't even know what it is, I replied, my voice coming out a little softer than I expected. I've been trying to figure things out. About myself. About my life. She nodded slowly, as if she understood exactly what I meant. I think we all spend too much time trying to figure things out, she said, her tone thoughtful. Sometimes, it's enough just to let things be. I blinked, a little surprised. But what if letting things be means I don't get the answers I need? She smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. Maybe the answers come when we stop forcing them. Life's a lot more about letting go than holding on, don't you think? I didn't know how to respond. The simplicity of her words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I had been so busy trying to control everything, to force solutions, to make things make sense. But what if I didn't need all the answers? What if I just needed to exist for a while and let things unfold on their own? I stayed with her on the bench for a while longer, not saying much. I think we both knew that sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence. When I stood up to leave, she gave me a small, kind smile. "Take care of yourself," she said, the words simple, but they felt like a promise. "And don't forget to let things be." I left the park feeling lighter, somehow. Maybe it wasn't a huge revelation, but it was a shift. A small piece of advice that, in its simplicity, had unsettled me in the best possible way. Maybe letting go wasn't such a bad idea. The next few days went by without much change. Alex and I continued our quiet dance, both of us avoiding the tough conversations but not letting the distance grow too wide. There were moments when it felt like we were walking parallel lives, but there were also moments, fleeting and small, where I caught glimpses of the connection we used to have. It wasn't gone, but it had become something new, something undefined. I didn't know where it would go from here. I didn't know what was next for us. But maybe that was okay. Maybe that was exactly where I needed to be. When I got home one evening, I found Alex sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She looked up when I entered, her expression soft, not exactly waiting for me, but not entirely distant either. "We need to talk," she said, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that old knot of fear in my chest. I felt calm, maybe even ready. "Yeah," I said, crossing the room to sit down across from her. "We do." The words hung in the air between us, unspoken but felt. We were sitting across from each other, the kitchen light casting a warm, soft glow over everything. The coffee cups in front of us, now cold, felt like an afterthought. It was strange how much had changed in such a short time. There was a stillness in the room now, not the heavy kind that had used to smother us, but the kind that made space for things to unfold, slowly, deliberately. "I've been thinking," Alex said, her voice soft, but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything, about how we got here." I nodded. "Me too," I said, the words feeling almost too simple for the weight of what was hanging between us. But it was true. I had been thinking about everything. How we'd started, how we drifted, and how we'd never really figured out how to communicate, how to be present with each other. Alex took a deep breath, running a hand through her hair, a nervous gesture that made my heart ache a little. She was always so controlled, so composed. Seeing her like this, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in months, caught me off guard. "I don't know where things went wrong," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were wide, and I could see the rawness there. It was the kind of honesty I hadn't gotten from her in so long. "I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think I pushed you away. I've been pushing you away for a while now. I've been so caught up in my own stuff that I didn't realize how much I was shutting you out." I didn't know what to say. The words she was saying felt almost too real, too raw. I wasn't used to hearing them. All I could do was sit there, nodding slightly, taking in the weight of it. There was a part of me that wanted to lash out, to demand answers for everything that had happened, for all the times I had felt like I was standing alone, but another part of me, maybe the part that had grown over the past few weeks, just wanted to listen. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for the way I've treated you, for the way I've made you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough." It felt like the air in the room had shifted, like the heaviness that had been lingering was finally lifting. I could see it now, the cracks in her walls, the way she was willing to let herself be seen, even if it made her uncomfortable. And I wasn't sure where it would go, but I realized something important in that moment. Maybe the fact that we were both able to acknowledge the truth, the mess, the hurt, the mistakes, was a kind of breakthrough in itself. I'm sorry too, I said, the words coming out more easily than I expected. I've been shutting myself off from you. I've been so focused on what I wanted and how much I felt like I was losing that I didn't see that you were hurting too. I didn't know how to fix it. Her eyes softened at my words, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No anger, no bitterness, just a shared understanding that we had both been carrying things we didn't know how to put down. We've both been holding on to too much, she said, her voice steadier now. Maybe it's time we start letting some of it go. The silence stretched out between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where everything that had needed to be said had already been spoken, and now we just had to figure out how to move forward from it. I don't know what's going to happen next, I said, finally breaking the quiet. But I know that I want to try. I want to try to figure it out together. Alex nodded, her eyes searching mine as if she was looking for something, maybe reassurance, or maybe just the same sense of hope that was stirring in me. Me too, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I know it's not going to be easy. We've both made mistakes. We've both hurt each other. I nodded again, the weight of those words sinking in. Yeah, but we can't keep going like we have. We can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. We need to figure out how to be honest with each other again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a way forward. It wasn't clear. It wasn't simple. But there was a chance, just a chance, that we could rebuild. Or at least start fresh, with a better understanding of who we were and where we had gone wrong. Maybe we could try therapy, I suggested cautiously, the words feeling strange but hopeful. Maybe it would help to have someone guide us through all this. Alex met my gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she sighed and gave a small, weary smile. I think that's a good idea, she said. I think we could both use it. But I need to really commit to it. Not just for us, but for myself too. I smiled back, a little relieved. We'll figure it out. Together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I actually believed it. We weren't there yet. Maybe we never would be. But we were trying. That was enough for now. I didn't know what the future held, or if this was the beginning of something new or the slow end of what had once been. But I knew that I wasn't giving up. We weren't giving up. The conversation stretched into the night. Simple things at first. Memories, plans, hopes. But eventually, we found our way back to a place of mutual understanding. We had work to do, no doubt. But tonight, in this moment, it felt like maybe we were both on the same page again. We didn't have all the answers. We probably never would. But that didn't matter. Not right now. Right now, all that mattered was that we were still here, still willing to try. And that, somehow, felt like enough. The weeks after that conversation felt like a slow unraveling of everything we had built, but in a good way. It wasn't all smooth. There were moments when I wanted to throw in the towel, when it felt easier to just walk away and forget everything. But we didn't. We kept showing up, both of us, even when it was hard. Alex took the lead on therapy. I think she needed to prove to herself that she was serious about it, that she wasn't just saying things to make me feel better. She started opening up in ways I hadn't expected. And for the first time in years, I listened. Really listened. No more avoiding, no more pretending. Just listening. Some sessions were tough. There were days when we barely spoke, when the silence felt heavy, thick with the weight of everything we'd never said. But there were breakthroughs too. Small ones at first. A glance that didn't feel forced. A shared laugh that wasn't a lie. It started to feel like we were on the same team again. Not perfect, but real. It wasn't just therapy that helped. It was the everyday stuff. The conversations that didn't happen in a sterile therapist's office. The little moments of connection that we had forgotten. I started making an effort to share more of myself, to stop holding back, and slowly, Alex did the same. One afternoon, 2 months after our breakthrough conversation, we were sitting in the kitchen again. The same table where we'd had that long talk. Alex was flipping through a magazine, and I was working on my laptop, but there was a comfort in the air that hadn't been there before. I could feel it. Our relationship, not fixed, but healing. Then, out of nowhere, Alex dropped her magazine and turned to me, her eyes wide. "I signed us up for a weekend trip," she said. I paused, looking at her with a raised eyebrow. What? Where? Just a little getaway, she said, shrugging. I think we need it. A chance to get away from everything. Just the two of us. I felt the familiar tension rise, the old instinct to resist creeping in. But then I realized I didn't want to resist anymore. I wanted to say yes. Okay, I said, surprising even myself. When do we leave? That weekend trip was nothing like the elaborate vacations we'd taken in the past. It wasn't about grand gestures or trying to fix anything in a few days. It was quiet, simple, just a cabin in the woods, a place where we could breathe without the weight of expectations. On the second night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alex turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the look of someone trying to figure out how to fix the past. It was the look of someone who was present, who was here, now. I'm glad we're doing this, she said, her voice low but steady. Me too, I replied. I think we might actually be okay. The words felt true. For the first time in a long time, they didn't just feel like something we were saying to get through the moment. They felt like something solid, something we could build on. And maybe that was the key to everything. Maybe it wasn't about finding the perfect solution or some big, dramatic gesture. Maybe it was about just showing up, day after day, and trying. As we sat there, the weight of everything that had happened still lingered between us, but it didn't feel as suffocating anymore. We were learning to let go of the need to control everything, to fix everything. There was a freedom in that, a relief. Maybe things would never be perfect, but they didn't need to be. Not anymore. And when we left the cabin, neither of us knew exactly what the future held. We knew there would still be hard days, times when we'd slip back into old habits, but we also knew something else, that we had come this far. That was something worth holding on to. And no matter what happened, we would keep trying. Together. That was enough for me.